Happy Adar Bet, everybody. An early Chag Sameach, Purim is on its way. I wanted for us to be able to kind of give the Megillat Esther a little bit of context and to see that what actually is taking place in the Megillah is even deeper than we would have thought. So I want to take us back in time to the very famous meeting that Yaakov Avinu has with his father Yitzchak. There Yaakov is dressed in goatskin, and Yitzchak Avinu says to Yaakov, he says, Hakol kol Yaakov v'hayadayim midei Esav. The voice is the voice of Yaakov, but the hands are the hands of Esav. And at first glance, it seems like what Yitzchak is saying is just something that he happens to notice. Oh, it sounds like one of my sons, but it feels like another one of my sons. But what's really interesting about these 6 words is that it actually is Yitzchak Avinu giving over this microcosm of the relationship that his 2 sons would have with each other for all of time. Yaakov's strength would always be his call, his voice, understanding when to be quiet, when to listen, and when to speak, versus Esav, whose strength would always be his brute, physical strength. And what's interesting is that when we actually look through Tanakh, we see that the word yad and the word kol are always repeated whenever, or in many situations when there's an interaction between Bnei Israel and Amalek. So for example, I'll just give you one example. The first time that Amalek comes against the Jewish people, right? We all know how Bnei Israel just left Mitzrayim, they're very weak. Amalek pounces and attacks, and right then and there, at the very end of the parak, it says that Hashem tells Moshe to write it down, and at the end it says, Ki yad al keska. There's a hand on the throne of Hashem. This is a reference to, according to Pshat, to Amalek. That somehow Amalek's strength, his hand, is on the throne of Hashem. It's interesting because then Chazal come in and say, no, actually Hashem says that he will put his own hand on his own throne to swear that Amalek is going to be destroyed. He won't be complete until Amalek's destroyed. But the idea of Yad and Amalek is always connected. And by the way, in that war between the Jewish people and Amalek, that very first time, Amalek is fighting, and Moshe Rabbeinu is davening his heart out. But what's he doing? He's lifting up his hands, right? Strange. What's going on there? And so although he's using Yaakov Avinu and Bnei Israel's strength of voice, he's saying to Hashem, I need your help to win over Esav's strength, Amalek's strength of the yad, of the hand, of physicality. And throughout Tanakh, whenever we see again, we always see yad and kol. What's this idea of kol? We know that in Tanakh, there were basically 2 people that were charged with the task of getting rid of Amalek, of getting rid of the Yad, of getting rid of those particular descendants of Esav. And who were they? Shaul HaMelech, the first king of the Jewish people, and later on Mordechai and Esther. And both of them, when it says Shaul and when it says Mordechai and Esther's name, it mentions that they're from Edythe Benjamin. Why is Edythe Benjamin the one who's tasked with destroying Amalek? And the Medrash on Esther Rabbah actually says that Shaul and Esther inherited this trait of kol, of mastery over voice, of mastery over when to be silent and when to speak. That true midah of Yaakov, they inherited from Benjamin, who inherited it from Rachel. Rachel knew when to be quiet, because when her sister was going to marry Yaakov, she knew this was the will of God. She was quiet, and in fact, she helped Leah. She gave her the simanim to make sure that the marriage would go and be smooth. And yet, in Shemayim, in Sefer Yirmiyahu, we know Rachel is the one, despite her silence beforehand, that Rachel is the one who cries to Hashem and advocates the Jewish people. Kol b'Rama nishma, there's a voice. Again, that reference to kol, right? That's wailing and weeping and davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Rachel had this midah, knowing when to be silent, knowing when to speak. Binyamin was quiet when he knew that his brothers had sold Yosef. He never told his father. And in fact, the stone that's for Benjamin on the Choshen was called Yeshpeh. Rashi says, what's this? Yeshpeh. Benjamin was known because he knew when to have a peh, when to have a voice, inheriting from Rachel. And that's why Benjamin was the one. Now we know Shaul HaMelech was charged with this idea of destroying Amalek. He was unsuccessful. He left the king of Amalek alive. If you actually look there in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, you'll see references to kol. When Shmuel talks to him, he utilizes the word kol, voice, many, many times. And then finally here, the Megillah, the story of Mordechai and Esther. And there's a terrible gezerah against the Jewish people. And Esther uses her voice. First, she uses her voice by being quiet and not telling anyone that she was Jewish. And then she uses her voice, not just knowing when to be silent, but knowing when to speak. And she davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She fasts for 3 days after the decree against her people comes out. She musters up all her courage and she marches in to the court of Achashverosh, even though she wasn't invited. That is the strength of the Jewish people. The ability to understand that sometimes we need to know when to be silent, and yet also understanding when to speak. When there are injustices in the world, to know we have to open our mouths. And so going into Purim, when we're reading that scene in Perek Dalet of Esther going to Achashverosh, we should remember that there were cosmic forces that were at play here. Epic forces of Yaakov versus Esav. I wish you a Chag Purim Sameach and a happy Rosh Hodesh.